You're listening to a CNA podcast.
또한 선거일을 임시 공휴일로 지정했습니다.
Last month, South Korea's acting interior minister announced Asia's fourth largest economy would head to the polls for a snap election on June the 3rd. The vote will decide who will succeed former President Yoon Suk Yeol, who was ousted over a botched martial law bid, leaving his People Power Party, or PPP, and South Korean politics in turmoil. The main opposition Democratic Party's candidate, Lee Jae-myung, is considered the frontrunner, and at the time of this recording, he's leading in the polls. Trailing him is PPP's Kim Moon-soo, whose platform mirrors that of the impeached president. I'm Teresa Tang. In this episode, CNA's senior correspondent Yoon Suk joins us from Seoul to set the stage for the showdown. We talk candidates, issues, and what the next leader's foreign policy position may be. Hi, Yoon Suk. Good to speak to you again.
Good morning, Teresa.
We could probably do a podcast episode on the chain of events that led us to this point, starting from that shock martial law decree on December the 3rd of last year. But we're not going to do that. I want to start off by asking you, how are Koreans feeling about this election? Are they ready for it? Are they excited, fatigued? What's the sense on the street?
Well, excited? Definitely not. Fatigue, yes. And it feels like Koreans are ready for that. A lot of people here are really just hoping that this election will be over very soon so the country can get back to being normal, that is, with a president, because there hasn't been one since last December when the parliament impeached Yoon Suk Yeol. So it's been more than 5 months, and people here are really tired. They're tired of this political noise and the feeling of this uneasiness, without having a leader, and they just really want to move on with their lives. And so, they are ready for this election. Early voting will be taking place over the next 2 days before the rest of the country heads to the polls on June the 3rd. Now, right now, there are 7 candidates in total, but really it's shaping up to be a two-way race. On one side, you have the Democratic Party candidate, Lee Jae-myung, while on the other side, you have Kim Moon-soo from the ruling People Power Party. Now, as of now, Lee Jae-myung is way out in front, with Kim Moon-soo trailing behind, and it'll be interesting to see if he can close that gap before Election Day. But remember, Kim Moon-soo had a late start campaigning compared to Lee Jae-myung because of former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo's announcement that he was going to also run in this presidential election. And that meant that Han Duck-soo and Kim Moon-soo would have had to unite and agree on who would run on the ruling party ticket. Now, that's because they couldn't afford to split the conservative votes, but they were not able to agree on this at the end, and it got pretty ugly at one time with Kim Moon-soo even, suing his own party, accusing the party of forcibly trying to bring him down and make Han Duck-soo the presidential candidate for the ruling party. But in the end, Han Duck-soo stepped down, leaving Kim Moon-soo now as the presidential candidate. So I think, between now and then, the candidates, whether it's Kim Moon-soo or Lee Jae-myung, I think, who can win more of the moderate votes, the undecided voters, will be the one who ends up becoming South Korea's next president.
The election comes amid the backdrop of economic uncertainty. The Democratic Party has pushed for more investment in AI, a 4.5-day work week, which is interesting, and also responding to U.S. tariffs. And the PPP has vowed to create more jobs. So I'm wondering, are domestic issues coming to the fore? Or are external factors like U.S. President Donald Trump taking a lot of attention? Because, we've seen the Trump factor influence other elections around the world.
Well, this is the snap election, and because of that, candidates really haven't had much time to develop, to debate the issues that they want to. And many experts here, including Lee Jae-mook, a professor of political science and diplomacy at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, believe that voters probably won't be heading to the polls with the policies in mind.
The impeachment has overshadowed everything. For any issue or policy to really resonate with voters, the campaign needs to be longer. Realistically, the only major issue that might register with voters is the economy. But even then, there aren't any immediate solutions that can be offered right now.
So it is possible that the only real issue in this election will be the economy, especially given the current slowdown both at home and globally. And with U.S. President Donald Trump back in the White House, the tariff issue is once again going to be a very important issue for voters. I mean, the consumer prices here are up. And, if you walk around Seoul and other cities around the country, you can really feel the downturn and see how bad the economy is. I mean, you do see rows of empty shops, fewer people eating out, and just really spending less overall. And so there is this growing concern here that things can get even worse, especially if South Korea's exports take a hit. And they might if the country fails to negotiate a deal with the United States. And so the opposition candidate Lee Jae-myung has called the U.S. tariffs very dangerous, and he has urged South Korea not to rush into the negotiations with Washington. And he also says that South Korean companies should coordinate with the government rather than acting on their own. Meanwhile, the ruling party candidate Kim Moon-soo has taken a very different approach. He says that he will meet with President Trump as soon as he takes office because he believes that maintaining that strong ties with the United States is a top priority for him. So very different approaches between the two of them. Depending on who wins, it could really shape the future of South Korea-U.S. relations for the next 5 years.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but I want to dig a bit deeper into the candidates now. The Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung, right? He's an old hand at this. This is the lawmaker's third presidential bid, and reports say he's been working really hard to consolidate anti-Yoon conservatives and moderate voters as well. Take a listen to this clip from his presidential bid announcement.
The world in which many people can be happy and hopeful is a true spring day, don't you think? I want to create a real Republic of Korea, not just the name Real Republic of Korea, and that Republic of Korea is created by great people. I just want to be a tool, the best tool, named Lee Jae-myung.
We should note that Mr. Yi survived an assassination attempt in 2024, and he's faced multiple court cases related to past alleged elections violations and corruption allegations as well, with those hearings actually on hold until after the poll. Could this be Mr. Yi's moment, Yoon Suk?
Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens on election day. But Lee Jae-myung has been moving towards the center a bit, trying to attract more of the conservative votes because he's been saying that the ruling party is no longer truly conservative and that he himself isn't strictly liberal also. And so he's framing this election this time as not about the political parties, but about who will be working for the people. And it seems to be working because his approval ratings have gone up recently, even in the traditionally conservative cities like Busan, Daejeon, and other parts of this Gyeongsang province. Now, he still faces major challenges, especially the legal ones, like you just said, and that could still hurt him in this election. The trials have been delayed, but, they loom large here in Korea. And for example, he faces the election law violation charges from 2022 presidential campaign. He's also accused of corruption and bribery from his time as mayor of Seongnam City, a city in the Gyeonggi province. There are also allegations related to the illegal transfer of funds to North Korea during his time as governor of the Gyeonggi province. Now, his vice governor and the head of the company that made the transfer on the province's behalf are currently behind bars. And so, it's unclear what is going to happen once he becomes president, whether he'll be questioned while in office or if the trials are going to be put on hold until his 5-year term ends. And it's these kind of uncertainties, some Koreans are feeling very uneasy, saying that something's not right if he does win. But, we'll have to see if it is going to affect voters on election day.
Then there, of course, is Kim Moon-soo, who is from the People Power Party. It seems like some can't get over his affiliation with Yoon Suk Yeol. He's been criticized for his platform. Some are saying, look, it's just a continuation of Yoon's presidency rather than a new beginning.
Well, yes, and I guess it's because he is from the ruling party, and it was the same ruling party that made Yoon Suk Yeol become the president in the last presidential elections. And so Kim Moon-soo is definitely having a hard time. it was Yoon Suk Yeol with that impeachment and all the declaration of the martial law. And I think a lot of South Koreans still see Kim Moon-soo as an extension of Yoon's administration, even though Yoon Suk Yeol has now left the party. And so it is a very tricky balancing act for Kim Moon-soo. But, there are still voters who support Yoon Suk Yeol. And so Kim Moon-soo doesn't want to lose their votes. But at the same time, he wants to distance himself from that image to be able to gain the broader support from the other voters. And so let's hear what Kim Moon-soo said on the day he was nominated as the party's presidential candidate.
Our president was impeached. Our democracy is in crisis. We are gathered here today with the resolve to win the presidential election. I won't let extremists who deny the system cause chaos in the country. I will restore the liberal democratic republic of Korea.
Now, that's exactly what he's been trying to do in the past few days and weeks, convincing voters that Lee Jae-myung simply cannot be allowed to run the country and that the only way to stop him is to vote for Kim Moon-soo. Now, whether, South Koreans here buy that message or not remains to be seen, but I think it is going to be very difficult for Kim Moon-soo to fully shake off this Yoon Suk Yeol's connection. For many voters, they see Kim Moon-soo, they still see Yoon Suk Yeol, and so they worry that Yoon Suk Yeol might continue to have or hold influence over the government should Kim Moon-soo become the next president.
Yeah, and this feels like the perfect time for me to ask about that, about where Yoon Suk Yeol is in all of this. He announced his departure from the PPP. He's thrown his support behind Kim Moon-soo. So how much influence does Yoon wield these days?
Well, there's been no opinion polls on this, but I think he still has his loyal supporters out there. And, he's been pretty quiet lately, avoiding direct comments about this election. And experts are saying that's actually a good news for Kim Moon-soo for him to do that. Experts also saying that the less Yoon speaks out or shows public support, the better Kim's chances are of winning in this election. But the main opposition candidate, Lee Jae-myung, wants South Koreans to remember what happened last December when Yoon declared that martial law. And so he keeps drawing that connection between Yoon Suk Yeol and Kim Moon-soo, making sure that South Koreans don't forget when they go to the polls. Now, Kim Moon-soo has apologized for Yoon Suk Yeol's action, but the opposition camp and many supporters here say that the apology wasn't sincere, that Kim's values are very similar to Yoon Suk Yeol's. And so they argue that Kim is apologizing just to win the votes while still standing behind Yoon Suk Yeol.
The candidates have taken to social media. They have pumped out shorts, live streams. There's a lot out there. Lee Jae-myung's videos, they're funny. There's lots of memes in them. Kim Moon-soo's videos, a little less flair. They're a bit more conservative. And I'm wondering how hotly contested social media has become as a battleground this election. How important is the youth vote?
Well, yes, they are very important. And, Kim Moon-soo is from the Conservative Party. So I think, you would see more of the social media contents being very conservative. But, because the votes of the youth are very important, both Lee Jae-myung and Kim Moon-soo are doing a lot of this digital campaigning, but very different ways. As you said, Lee Jae-myung's team has really embraced all the humor and the internet culture. And many here in South Korea are also saying that short form videos, that they are funny and they have been going viral here. And many of the young voters have said they liked them, and the young voters are those who consume most of their news on platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and the opposition camp has really made very good use of them. Meanwhile, as you said, Kim Moon-soo, his team, they see the importance of this, but it's more traditional in tone and message. They believe that they need to be a bit more serious and policy focused, trying to portray this image of stability and leadership at a time of uncertainty here right now in South Korea. So in a way, it hasn't gone as viral as the opposition camp, but experts are saying that the ruling party needs to adopt better ways to get its message across to social media, because it's not just about going out in the streets and rallying anymore. It's really about those retweets, those likes, the shares, and young voters here in South Korea, especially those in your 20s and 30s, they make up for about 30% or slightly more than 30% of the votes here. And so it's huge, but That is, if they all come out to vote. But usually the turnout is lower than the national average voter turnout. And so, while we see more of the older South Koreans going out to vote, whether it rains or not, while the younger voters would not really go out and vote at all times. And so it really depends on how much of them will come out in this election, how important they see this. But definitely the ruling party will have to do a bit more and much more to try and get the social media going for them.
Before we go, Yoon Suk, for those of us watching from afar, why does who wins really matter? In particular, how will the outcome of this election ultimately affect the U.S.-South Korea alliance and also, of course, relations with neighbors Japan and China?
Well, it is very important. I mean, first of all, for South Koreans who haven't had a leader for 5 months, will finally have a president. And the first task for that president will likely be to restore this order and stability in the country. And then there's South Korea's alliance with its traditional ally, the United States. And this election could have a major impact on where that alliance will be heading, since the two presidential candidates have very different views on how South Korea should deal with the United States. Whether South Korea will be continuing this close cooperation with the United States, not just on economic issues, but also importantly on the security, defense, and especially North Korea, or if South Korea is going to try and secure its own national interests first and try to seek more of this leverage and more distance with Washington. Now, how the president deals with Washington could definitely have a big impact on South Korea's relationships with these neighboring countries like China and Japan. The ruling party presidential candidate Kim Moon-soo is expected to continue South Korea's, warm ties with Japan, a relationship that only really started under the Yoon Suk Yeol administration. On the other hand, you have Lee Jae-myung, who has been a vocal critic of Yoon's approach to historical issues, like the one on forced labor. And at one time, he did call it a humiliation. And so, he has toned down his rhetoric during the campaign recently, though many experts here are saying that it could just be a strategy to win voters. And if he is elected, the South Korea may see a shift in their stance once he is in office. Also, when it comes to China, Lee Jae-myung might try to create some distance from Washington and move closer to Beijing. And that would be a shift from former President Yoon Suk Yeol, who, heavily relied on strengthening ties with the United States. So the June 3rd election is crucial for South Koreans. It's definitely going to be one that the world will be watching, including Washington and Pyongyang. And South Koreans here will be watching the results of that election very closely, too.
Less than a week before we find out who will lead South Korea into its next chapter. Thank you very much, Yoon Suk, for all of that.
Thank you, Teresa. It's been nice talking to you on the Korean election.
Well, to follow all of Yoon Suk's reports leading up to and on Election Day, just head to YouTube and CNA.Asia. There are also TV episodes of CNA Correspondent every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. I'm Teresa Tang. Thanks very much for joining me this week. The team behind this episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Tiffany Ung, Junani Johari, and Craig Dale. Bye for now. See you next week.